What if I told you that the harder you try to catch a fish, the more fish you are actually losing? We have all been taught from day one to hold onto our fishing rods with an iron grip, just in case a monster decides to strike. But that old-school mentality is exactly why you are coming home empty-handed. In this video, we are going to expose a massive mistake that almost every angler makes. We are talking about the death grip, and I'm going to show you exactly why squeezing your rod handle is causing you to miss the microscopic vibrations of the biggest fish in the lake. Before we get into this game-changing secret, drop a comment right now and be honest. Do you grip your rod tightly like a baseball bat, or do you hold it loosely like a delicate instrument? Let us see how many of you are already making this critical mistake. This topic is absolutely vital for anyone who wants to take their fishing to the next level. For decades, our grandfathers and fathers told us to hold on tight. They planted this fear in our heads that if we relax for even a second, a giant bass or pike is going to violently rip our expensive rod right out of our hands and drag it into the depths. Because of this fear and the natural adrenaline rush of being out on the water, millions of fishermen spend years doing the exact same thing. They squeeze their cork handles until their knuckles turn white. But while they are protecting their gear from a phantom threat, they are completely blinding themselves to what is actually happening underwater. Old habits die hard, but today we are going to break that habit and unlock the true sensitivity of your fishing gear. Imagine the fishing rod blank as a highly tuned guitar string. When a fish barely lips your bait down there in the dark water, it sends a tiny, microscopic shockwave traveling all the way up your braided line, through the guides, and straight into the carbon fiber of your rod. Carbon fiber is literally designed to transmit these high-frequency vibrations directly to your hand. But here is the brutal truth that nobody talks about. If you are wrapping your hand completely around that cork or foam handle and squeezing it like you are trying to choke a snake, your own hand becomes a giant, fleshy shock absorber. Your tight muscles literally soak up that vibration before it can ever register in your brain. You are paying $300 for a highly sensitive fishing rod, and then you are totally neutralizing all of that expensive technology just by squeezing your hand too tight. Your knuckles are turning white, your forearm is tense, and all those microscopic signals just die the second they reach your palm. You might think you are feeling everything, but you are only feeling the aggressive, rod-bending strikes. The really smart, big fish that just inhale the bait and spit it out in a fraction of a second. You never even knew they were there. Your rigid muscles acted like a sponge, soaking up the very data you need to set the hook. Let us break down exactly what happens in your hand when you grip that rod handle with everything you have got. Try this right now, even without a rod. Squeeze your fist as hard as you can. Feel how the tendons in your wrist lock up, and the muscles in your forearm turn as hard as a rock. When your muscles are engaged like that, they lose their ability to act as sensory receivers. They are locked into a state of tension, completely focused on holding on, rather than feeling. Now, relax your hand completely. Just let your fingers hang loose. If someone were to gently tap your fingernail right now, you would feel it instantly and sharply, right? That is the exact biological mechanism we are talking about on the water. When you are out there casting a jig or a soft plastic, and you lock your hand around that reel seat, you are completely deadening the nerve endings in your fingers. You are essentially turning off the communication between the fishing rod and your brain. The microscopic vibrations of a walleye or a bass gently sucking in your bait create a very specific, tiny resonance. It is not a violent tug, it is a subtle displacement of water and a tiny click. If your hand is relaxed, that click travels through the hard material of the rod and tickles your relaxed nerves. If your hand is clenched, That click just bounces off your tense muscles and disappears into the void. Picture this classic scenario. It is 6 o'clock in the morning, the sun is just barely starting to peek over the tree line, and there is a thick, cold mist rolling across the surface of the lake. It is absolutely dead quiet. You step up to the front of the boat, make your first long cast out toward a rocky point, and you start to wait. The air is chilly, so naturally, your body tenses up. You are gripping that rod tightly because your hands are cold, and you are full of that early morning adrenaline, just dying for that first big bite of the day. You drag your jig across the bottom, waiting for that unmistakable thump. But because your hands are freezing, and you are squeezing the life out of that handle, you are totally numb to what is actually happening down there 20 feet below the surface. A sluggish morning fish swims up, flares its gills, and lightly sucks the tail of your plastic bait into its mouth. It does not run away with it. It just sits there holding it. Because your grip is locked up tight from the cold and the anticipation, you do not feel the tiny shift in weight. You do not feel the loss of contact with the bottom. You just keep dragging, and a second later, the fish spits it out. You pull your lure back to the boat, look at the teeth marks on your plastic, and wonder how on earth you missed that fish. The answer is simple. Your morning death grip cost you the best bite of the day. There is a really persistent myth in the fishing community, probably passed down from our grandfathers, that you need to hold onto your fishing rod with an iron grip at all times. The old saying goes that you have to hold on tight, or else a giant fish is going to strike out of nowhere and literally rip the rod right out of your hands and drag it into the depths. Let us be totally honest here for a second. When was the last time a fish actually ripped a rod out of your closed hands? Unless you are trolling for giant marlin in the ocean while taking a nap, it just does not happen in everyday freshwater fishing. We are so paranoid about losing our gear that we sacrifice 90% of our sensitivity just to feel secure. The truth is, your hand is naturally designed to close reflexively the second you feel weight or a strike. You do not need to preemptively squeeze the rod handle like a vice grip. A loose, relaxed hold is perfectly secure. Your fingers wrap around the reel seat naturally. When a fish actually hits, your human reflexes are incredibly fast. Your brain will command your hand to clamp down securely in the exact same millisecond that you rear back for the hook set. Holding the rod tightly before the bite even happens is like driving your truck down the highway with your foot already pressing hard on the brake pedal just in case you need to stop. It just ruins the entire ride. One of the hardest things to master in bottom fishing, whether you are dragging a heavy rig or hopping a football jig, is telling the difference between a real bite and a piece of structure. You are dragging your bait along, and suddenly you feel something. Was that a bass? Or was that a submerged tree branch? Was that a walleye picking it up? Or did you just bump into a limestone rock? This is exactly where the death grip absolutely destroys your success rate. When your hand is gripped tightly around the rod, every single bump feels exactly the same. The tension in your muscles makes a rock feel like a bite, and a bite feel like a rock. Everything translates as a dull, generic thud. But when you relax your grip, a whole new world of underwater texture opens up to you. Wood feels soft and spongy. Rocks feel sharp and hard, sending a very distinct ringing vibration up the line. And a fish bite? A fish bite feels completely different. It feels alive. It has a strange, double-tapping resonance, or a sudden feeling of weightlessness that no rock or stump can ever replicate. When you hold the rod softly, you give your brain the chance to process the specific frequency of the vibration. You stop setting the hook on tree stumps, saving your energy and your lures, and you start recognizing the microscopic, living pulse of a fish that has just made a huge mistake. So what exactly is the alternative to the death grip? We call it the feather grip, and it is a technique that the best professional anglers use to dramatically increase their catch rate. Imagine holding a small, fragile bird in your hand. You need to hold it securely enough so that it does not fly away, but you have to be gentle enough not to crush its delicate little bones. That is exactly how you should be holding your fishing rod. Your fingers should just lightly drape over the reel seat. Your palm should barely be resting against the cork handle. There should be visible daylight between the base of your thumb and the rod handle. You want the rod to rest entirely in the crook of your fingers, supported by a gentle balance rather than brute force. When you hold it this way, the rod handle acts like a tuning fork. Without your heavy, meaty palm wrapped tightly around it to deaden the sound, the blank is free to vibrate intensely. The first time you try the feather grip, it is going to feel wrong. It is going to feel like you are not in control. You might even feel a little bit anxious, thinking the rod is going to slip out of your grasp. But push through that weird feeling for just 1 hour of fishing. The very first time a fish lightly taps your bait, the shockwave that hits your relaxed fingers will be so incredibly loud and clear, you will never go back to squeezing it. Let us talk about deep water fishing, because this is where a relaxed grip goes from being a nice trick to being an absolute mandatory requirement. When you are dropping a heavy spoon or a jig down 40, 50, or 60 feet deep, you are dealing with a massive amount of line stretch, even if you are using high-quality braided line. The water pressure against your line, the current pushing against your lure, and the sheer distance all work together to mute the vibrations coming from the bottom. By the time the feeling of a bite travels up 50 feet of line, through the water column, and reaches your rod tip, it has lost 90% of its energy. It is barely a whisper by the time it gets to your hands. If you are gripping that rod with white knuckles, you have absolutely zero chance of feeling that whisper. The vibration will simply die in your tense forearm. When fishing deep, you have to be in a state of hyper-relaxed concentration. You rest the rod softly in your hand, complete your eyes, and tune out everything else around you. You are waiting for a microscopic tick. Sometimes it is not even a tick. Sometimes it is just a strange feeling that the rhythmic vibration of your sinking lure has suddenly stopped for a fraction of a second. If your hand is soft and receptive, you will feel that unnatural pause. You will reel down, set the hook hard, and pull up a giant fish that nobody else on the lake could have caught. If you are having a hard time teaching yourself to relax your hand, there is a very specific physical trick you can use to force your brain to loosen up. It is all about the placement of your index finger. Most fishermen naturally wrap all 4 fingers securely underneath the reel seat, gripping it like a heavy baseball bat. To break this terrible habit, unwrap your index finger and extend it completely straight, pointing it directly up the rod blank. Lay the soft pad of your index finger directly against the bare carbon fiber of the rod, just above the handle. This does 2 incredible things at once. First, it makes it physically impossible to squeeze the handle with a full death grip. Your hand is forced into a more open, relaxed posture by default. Second, you are placing the most sensitive nerve endings on your entire hand directly onto the main transmission line of the rod. Your index finger is incredibly sensitive to texture and vibration. By laying it flat on the blank, you are bypassing the handle materials completely. You will literally feel the braided line humming through the guides. You will feel the exact moment a tiny blade of grass catches on your hook. It is like plugging a high-speed data cable straight from your lure directly into your nervous system. Try extending that finger on your very next cast and watch how it instantly transforms your awareness of what is happening underwater. A few years ago, I was out on a highly pressured public lake, struggling to get a single bite. The fish were incredibly finicky, just barely nipping at the tails of our baits. I was fishing next to this legendary local guy, an old-timer who had been fishing these exact same waters for over 40 years. He was pulling up fish after fish, while I was getting absolutely nothing. I finally stopped casting and just stood there, watching him closely to see what his secret was. I expected to see some secret lure or some crazy retrieve speed. But what I noticed was his hands. He was holding his expensive spinning rod so loosely that it looked like it was about to fall right out of his hands and into the water. His wrist was limp, his fingers were barely touching the cork, and he looked like he was half asleep. But every 5 minutes, his relaxed hand would suddenly snap shut, his wrist would flash back, and his rod would be bent double with another massive fish. I asked him about it, and he just smiled and said, "You cannot hear a whisper if you are screaming." He meant that if your hands are screaming with tension, you cannot hear the whisper of a subtle bite. That conversation completely changed my perspective. I spent the rest of the day actively reminding myself to loosen my grip, shaking the tension out of my arms, and miraculously, I started feeling those microscopic bites that I had been blind to all morning. To really understand why the relaxed grip is so critical, you have to understand the actual biology of how fish feed. A lot of anglers think that every fish attacks a lure like a great white shark hitting a seal. They picture the fish swimming up at 20 miles an hour and violently slamming the bait. While that does happen during a heavy feeding frenzy, it is completely false for the vast majority of bites. Most predatory fish, like bass and walleye, use a vacuum mechanism to eat. They swim up behind your lure, open their large mouths rapidly, and flare their gills. This creates a sudden, powerful suction that pulls the water, and your lure along with it, straight into their mouth. They do not smash it, they inhale it. And if they realize it feels unnatural, they will exhale it just as fast. When a fish inhales your bait, it does not pull hard on your line. In fact, it often creates a momentary slack in the line because the lure just moved toward the fish. The only signal you get is a microscopic loss of tension, a tiny click of the line snapping straight for a microsecond, or a weird spongy feeling. If your hands are locked in a death grip, you will never feel that vacuum effect. You will only feel the bite if the fish decides to turn and swim away. By relaxing your hand, you tune into the vacuum. You feel that tiny drop in weight, and you strike before the fish ever has a chance to spit it out. This concept does not just apply to slow, bottom-dragging techniques. It is equally important when you are throwing fast-moving baits like crankbaits or vibrating bladed jigs. When you are burning a crankbait through the water, the rod tip is throbbing wildly. It feels like a lot of action, so most fishermen naturally grip the rod tightly to fight the heavy resistance of the lure pulling against the water. But here is the secret. You do not want to feel the heavy vibration. You want to feel the exact moment that vibration changes. When a fish comes up behind a moving bait and tracks it, it actually pushes a wall of water ahead of it. This water pressure disrupts the action of your lure. The blade might skip a beat. The crankbait might lose its tight wobble for just half a second. This is the microscopic change you need to be hunting for. If you are strangling your rod handle, your muscles are already overwhelmed by the heavy, rhythmic thumping of the lure. You become totally numb to the subtle skip in the rhythm. But if you hold the rod loosely, letting it bounce freely in your relaxed palm, your hand becomes sensitive to the change in frequency. You will feel the bait suddenly go mushy, or you will feel the vibration stop just before the fish actually bites. That early warning system allows you to mentally prepare for the hook set, giving you a massive advantage over the fish. Let us talk about the psychological side of the death grip, because fishing is just as much a mental game as it is a physical one. When you know you are in a good spot, your brain kicks into high gear. You see a beautiful submerged tree on your sonar, Or you cast into a perfect eddy in the river. Your brain tells you, there is absolutely a big fish sitting right there. Your heart rate starts to climb. Your body floods with adrenaline in anticipation of the strike. And what does the human body do when it gets pumped full of adrenaline? It tenses up. It goes into fight or flight mode. Without you even realizing it, your fingers wrap tighter and tighter around the rod handle as your lure gets closer to the strike zone. You are literally choking the rod because you are so incredibly eager to get the bite. It is a completely natural human reflex to squeeze when you are excited. But it is the absolute worst thing you can do at that critical moment. You have to train your brain to fight that instinct. When you feel your heart rate going up, when you know your reorder is entering the danger zone, that is the exact moment you need to consciously tell your hand to let go. You have to force yourself to breathe out, drop your shoulders, and loosen your fingers. By fighting the adrenaline and forcing a state of physical relaxation, you keep your sensory pathways wide open exactly when you need them the most. Another massive factor that contributes to the death grip is how your rod and reel are balanced and exactly where you are holding the handle. A lot of anglers grip the rod way too far down, grabbing the thickest part of the cork below the reel. Because the rod is top-heavy, they have to squeeze tightly just to keep the tip pointed up. You are fighting the physical weight of the rod, and that constant muscle tension completely ruins your sensitivity. The key is to find the perfect balance point of your setup. Usually, this means moving your hand much further up, so the stem of the spinning reel is sitting right between your middle and ring fingers, or palming the casting reel completely with your hand. When you hold the rod at its true balance point, it should feel virtually weightless in your hand. It should sit perfectly level without you having to apply any downward pressure with your thumb or upward pressure with your fingers. When the rod balances itself, you no longer need to use muscle power to hold it in place. You can finally adopt that incredibly soft feather grip without feeling like the rod tip is dragging down toward the water. Take a few minutes at home to find the absolute center of gravity on your favorite rod and reel combo, and train your hand to stay in that exact spot. It removes the physical strain and instantly upgrades your ability to feel microscopic bites. Wind is the absolute enemy of feeling subtle bites. When you are out on the lake and the wind is howling at 20 miles per hour, it puts a massive belly in your line. The wind is catching your line like a sail, pulling it sideways and creating a huge amount of unnatural tension. Because the wind is fighting you, your natural instinct is to fight back. You grip the rod harder, you plant your feet wider, and you try to muscle your way through the rough conditions. This combination of a bowed line and a tight, stressed grip means you are essentially fishing totally blind. You could have a 5-pound fish chewing on your bait for 10 seconds, and the wind and your tense muscles would completely hide the entire event. To combat the wind, you have to do the exact opposite of what your brain is telling you to do. You have to point your rod tip directly down, almost touching the surface of the water, to keep the wind from catching your line. And more importantly, you have to force your hands to remain incredibly soft. You need to let the rod tip move naturally with the gusts of wind, absorbing the shock loosely with your wrist. By relaxing your grip, you can feel the difference between the steady, rhythmic pull of the wind and the sudden, sharp, unnatural tap of a fish grabbing your lure in the middle of a whitecap. It takes immense discipline to stay relaxed in a storm, but it pays off heavily. Let us talk about the most critical phase of almost any cast, and that is the initial drop. Whether you are pitching a heavy jig into a bush or casting a weightless plastic worm next to a dock, a massive percentage of strikes happen while the bait is falling to the bottom. During this phase, your bait is totally free-falling. There is no tension on the line. Most fishermen cast out, engage the reel, grip the rod tight, and wait for the bait to hit the mud. Because they are holding the rod tight, their arms are rigid. When a fish intercepts that falling bait halfway down, it does not pull the rod, it just stops the lure from sinking. The line goes slightly slack a few seconds too early. If your hands are tight, your rigid arms will not notice this tiny change in line behavior. But if you hold the rod with a feather-light grip, allowing the tip to just float gracefully in your hand as the bait sinks, your body becomes incredibly attuned to the weight of the line itself. The absolute second that a fish breathes on that falling bait, you will feel the rod tip suddenly feel an ounce lighter. It is the strangest, most delicate sensation in fishing. It feels like the lure just vanished into thin air. If your grip is loose, you will feel that vanishing act instantly. You will reel up the slack, hit the fish hard, and catch the ones that bite on the drop. If you still do not believe how much a tight grip kills your sensitivity, you need to perform this simple experiment at home tonight. Grab your favorite fishing rod and ask a buddy or your spouse to help you out. Close your eyes and grip the handle of the rod as tightly as you normally do when you are out on the water, squeezing the cork hard. Tell your partner to lightly tap the very tip of the rod with a metal spoon or a small coin. Feel how that vibration travels down. It will feel like a dull, distant thud. Now, do the exact same thing, but completely open your hand. Just balance the rod lightly across your open palm and flat fingers. Have your partner tap the rod tip with the exact same amount of force. The difference will absolutely blow your mind. With an open, relaxed hand, that gentle tap will feel like an electric shock running straight into your bones. The sound of the tap will seem to echo through the carbon fiber and ring in your palm. It is a black and white difference. This simple living room experiment proves without a shadow of a doubt that carbon fiber rods are incredibly efficient transmitters of information, but human muscles are the ultimate dampeners. Every time you squeeze the rod on the water, you are choosing to put a muffler on your equipment. Once you feel this difference in your own living room, your approach to holding a rod will change forever. There is another massive downside to the death grip that nobody ever mentions, and that is physical fatigue. Fishing is supposed to be relaxing, but if you are out there casting a heavy spinnerbait or dragging a large rig for 8 hours straight while squeezing the handle like a madman, you are doing serious damage to your endurance. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, your forearm is burning, your wrist is stiff, and your fingers are cramping up. When your muscles are physically exhausted, your brain stops focusing on the microscopic vibrations of the lure and starts focusing on the pain in your wrist. You lose your mental edge. Your reaction time slows down drastically. When that late afternoon bite finally turns on, you are too tired to capitalize on it. You get a subtle tap, but your fatigued muscles are too slow to register the hit and drive the hook home. Adopting a soft, relaxed grip is not just about sensitivity, it is about incredible stamina. When you hold the rod loosely, using the skeletal balance of your hand rather than raw muscle power, you can fish for 12 hours straight without feeling a single ache. Your hands stay fresh, your mind stays sharp, and your reflexes remain lightning fast all the way until the sun goes down. A relaxed angler is a dangerous angler because they never lose their intense focus. Sometimes breaking a bad habit requires a drastic change in equipment. If you are someone who has relied on a heavy, stiff, broomstick-style rod your entire life, your brain is totally wired to grip it hard. Heavy rods require heavy handling. One of the best ways to train yourself to use a feather grip is to intentionally switch to an ultralight setup for a few days. Grab a tiny spinning rod designed for panfish or trout, put on some 4-pound test line, and go to a local pond. Because the rod is so incredibly thin and fragile, your brain will naturally tell your hand to treat it with respect. You simply cannot squeeze an ultralight rod with a death grip, or it feels like you are going to snap it in half. You will naturally start holding it with just your fingertips. As you cast tiny jigs and catch small fish with this delicate setup, you will start to experience the incredible joy of feeling every single pebble and weed on the bottom. Your hands will learn the muscle memory of a soft grip. You will realize that you do not need brute strength to control a fishing rod. Once your hands have memorized this delicate posture, you can go back to your heavier bass or walleye gear, and you will naturally carry that soft touch over to the big rods. It is a fantastic training exercise that resets your bad habits from the ground up. Let us dive a little deeper into the neuroscience of setting the hook, because it perfectly explains why tension is your enemy. When a fish bites, that microscopic vibration hits the nerve endings in your fingers. That signal then has to travel up your arm, through your spinal cord, and into your brain. Your brain processes the signal, confirms it is a bite, and sends a command back down your arm to violently jerk the rod backward. This entire process happens in a fraction of a second. But here is the critical flaw. If your forearm muscles are already intensely flexed from a death grip, your brain has to send an extra command. It first has to tell your muscles to unlock from their current state of tension, redirect their energy, and then fire again in a different direction to set the hook. This physiological delay might only cost you 1/10 of a second, but in the world of fishing, 1/10 of a second is an absolute eternity. A smart fish can spit a plastic bait out in less time than it takes you to blink. By keeping your hand relaxed, your muscles are in a state of neutral readiness. They do not have to unlock before they fire. When the signal hits your brain, your hand can snap shut and drive the hook home instantly, with zero wasted time. A soft grip literally makes your reaction time biologically faster. Ultimately, adopting this totally relaxed approach to holding your fishing rod requires a fundamental shift in your fishing philosophy. We are taught from a young age that more effort equals better results. We think that if we try harder, grip tighter, and pull stronger, we will catch more fish. But water is a fluid, subtle environment, and the creatures that live in it operate on microscopic levels of vibration and pressure. To connect with that environment, you have to become part of it. You cannot force your way to better sensitivity. You have to step back, soften your approach, and let the equipment do exactly what it was engineered to do. A premium carbon fiber rod is a high-tech listening device. Your only job is to get your heavy, noisy, tense hands out of the way so the rod can speak to you clearly. The next time you are out on the cold water, making that first cast into the morning mist, I want you to consciously look down at your hand. If your knuckles are white, take a deep breath, shake out your arm, open your fingers, rest the blank softly on your skin, and just listen to the vibration. It is going to feel terrifyingly loose at first, but I promise you, the underwater world is about to get a whole lot louder. You are about to discover a massive population of fish that have been secretly biting your lure for years without you ever knowing it. To wrap things up, the secret to feeling more bites has absolutely nothing to do with buying a more expensive rod, and everything to do with letting go of your old habits. The unexpected turning point here is that by using less force, you actually gain faster reaction times and infinitely more feeling. This small adjustment will completely change your approach to fishing because you will finally stop guessing and start knowing exactly what is happening at the end of your line. Thank you so much for watching. If this video helped you rethink your grip, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like to support the channel. Now I want to hear from you down in the comments. What was the strangest bite you ever felt when you were barely holding onto your rod and not paying attention? Let us talk about it below.